Hey, I'm Trey. Today's story is about a killer that used murder to cover up the crimes that were committed. If you're interested in stories like these, I upload new content every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, please leave your comments, suggestions, or questions in the comment section. So if you're ready, let's get started. 1984, in the country of Australia, an unknown stranger began to stalk a couple that were homeowners. Their moving patterns were observed as they went about their daily routines. This stranger was more than just curious, but was interested in finding out when the home would be vacant and when they would be expected to return. Unfortunately, the couple was not aware that they were being watched. The stranger eventually acquired enough information in order to learn when and how would be the right method and time to make his or her next move. The stranger, who had now become an intruder, broke into the home and began rummaging through the resident's property. The intruder was looking for anything of value to steal. The burglar must have been inexperienced and created a lot of noise during the break-in. I'm sure that this burglar assumed that there was no one home after all of the fine investigative work done by the burglar prior to the theft, but that was the furthest thing from the truth. A man by the name of John Kavanaugh and his girlfriend Carmelita Lee both resided at that location. The couple had chosen to remain home together that day. Both John and Carmelita heard all the commotion coming from a different part of their house, and they began to investigate together. When the couple approached, they noticed a man in their home, and together they began to yell at the burglar. This is when the burglar became startled, produced a handgun, and shot both John and Carmelita multiple times to death before escaping into the night. Allegedly, the following day the police were summoned and the bodies of both victims were found. The home was looked as though the actor left in a disarray after stealing as many valuables as possible. The police labeled it as a botched burglary at that time. No evidence or witnesses were located at that time. Since the police had no leads left to follow, the crime remained unsolved for years. 1987, another burglary at a different location. This time the burglar took time out to surveil the residence. The home was a mansion-style house that was owned by a wealthy businessman by the name of William Graff. The burglar took time and found out that the owner was away from the home several weeks each month for business trips. It was alleged the residence contained a lot of valuable property within the home. Believing that the home was vacant most of the time, the burglar would be able to take all the time necessary to steal as many valuables without the fear of being discovered. Unbeknownst to the burglar, William was wealthy enough to afford a caretaker of his home during his absence. The caretaker's name was Renee Harford. The burglar easily broke into the residence and began searching for valuables to steal. While strolling through the mansion to see what was worthy of stealing, along with manifesting a plan on how to cart it all away, the thief encountered the caretaker by surprise. The burglar, armed with a screwdriver used to break into the residence, took that same screwdriver and stabbed Renee repeatedly. She fought back and continued screaming at the top of her lungs because her life depended on it, but those screams of terror fell on deaf ears. Sadly, the multiple stab wounds to her torso and arms ultimately incapacitated her. After the attacker was completely sure that the fight was stabbed out of Renee, she was then immobilized by being tied to a chair. In her weakened state, she still was alive, sobbing and pleading for her life to her captor. I'm sure that the attacker didn't plan to run into anyone during the burglary or even wind up stabbing anyone, but I guess he was forced to play the cards that had been dealt. I guess that makes sense if you're crazy. The rest of us will never understand. The actor then allegedly continued on his hunt to steal valuables throughout the house. After the burglar stole his fill of precious items, he needed to make a decision on what to do with Renee. She was still alive, but barely. He thought about it and then decided it was better to kill her than to take a chance on being apprehended by the authorities. The thief then went into the kitchen and took out a vegetable knife from one of its drawers. As the thief walked towards Renee with the knife, she gave out a high-pitched scream. Renee was stabbed several more times with that vegetable knife as she sat helpless and tied to that chair. In pain and terrified, she eventually died of her injuries. It wasn't clear on how long it took the authorities to find Renee's body, but no information was provided. The investigators found no clues or witnesses, and the case remained cold. Lindsay Robert Rose was born in 1955 in the country of Australia. Lindsay's parents divorced when he was at a young age. Lindsay was raised by his mother after she divorced his father. No further information was provided on his youth or family dynamic, but when Lindsay grew up, he held several jobs until he found work for a local ambulance service. He eventually settled into becoming an official certified private investigator. He chose this position not because he was interested in investigations, but as an investigator, Lindsay was able to legally carry a firearm for his job, in which he carried with him wherever he went. February 1994, the same burglar was interested now in robbing a massage parlor. This was more than likely due to the large sums of money that they tend to possess. It was also a well-known fact that many of the employees were illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants were far less likely to be trusting of the local authorities, even if a crime had been committed against them. Lindsay met a man by the name of Ronald Waters, and they became close associates. They would spend their time together thinking about different ways that they can make money. Lindsay likely already had an idea of what he really wanted to do to earn cash, but he wanted to test Ronald to see if he would be a willing participant. Lindsay offered Ronald $500 if he were to knock on the door of the massage parlor after its evening closing. Lindsay explained to Robert that he did not have to participate in the actual robbery, but he needed his help with getting the employees to open the door. I'm sorry, his associate must have been dim-witted. He was offered $500 for a first-degree felony? That seems fair. The employees of the massage parlor were familiar with Robert from previous interactions and would likely open the door when they recognized his face. That's when Lindsay would rob them at gunpoint without resistance. The night came and Mark did as he was instructed. The door was open and they were greeted by employees Fatima Ozone and Kerry Pang. Lindsay and Mark forced their way in at gunpoint. That's when the two employees screamed in terror before they were immediately shot and killed by Lindsay. The store was robbed for an undetermined amount of cash before Lindsay and Mark fled the location. The police found no witnesses to the robbery, and the murders remained solved until 1996. During that year, an associate of Lindsay's, who happened to have also been a corrupt police officer, whose name was not provided obviously, divulged information to local authorities about several unsolved homicides. This was more than likely part of a plea bargain that was made so the officer could not be held accountable for any crimes that he or she had committed. The corrupt police officer, who turned out to be an informant, told the authorities that Lindsay bragged to him personally about several of the homicides that he had committed and got away with. Wait a minute, I'm curious, how does one brag about murders they committed? Like, of course I kill people every chance I get. Boy, I could tell you some stories. Lindsay was brought into the police department for questioning. Shortly after, he was released pending the investigation. Lindsay must have become concerned about how the authorities found out about the killings he committed. Eventually, the authorities were able to build enough case to charge him with several of the homicides. Approximately 9 months later, he was apprehended by the authorities. This time, Lindsay was interviewed and he confessed to all of the homicides. This included the 3 murders from the previous burglaries. Lindsay explained to the authorities that he had an excuse for each one of the murders he committed. Personally, to me, this doesn't sound like a defense, it sounds more like an excuse, but here it is. For the first 2 victims, John Kavanaugh and Carmelita Lee, their homicides, Lindsay stated that he killed John only out of revenge because he got into a fist fight and beat up one of his close friends several years prior. Carmelita Lee was killed because Lindsay didn't want to leave any witnesses behind. Now for Renee Harford's murder, Lindsay assumed that no one was home at the time of the burglary. He was startled by her existence and he killed her to silence her. And for the murder of the employees of the massage parlor, Lindsay stated that he was hired by the co-owner of the store by the name of Mark Lewis. Mark was allegedly unhappy with his business arrangement with Fatima Ozol and Kerry Pang, so he wanted them both eliminated. Lindsay's payment for the killings would be any proceeds that were available during the robbery. Due to the overwhelming amount of evidence against Lindsay, he confessed to the 5 murders and received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Mark Lewis was arrested for hiring Lindsay as a hitman. He pled not guilty. He went to trial and lost. Mark was also given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Ronald Waters, the genius of the group, was given 18 months in prison for being an accessory to the robbery after the fact. If you enjoy more stories such as these, click on one of the suggested videos above. I upload new content every Tuesday and Thursday. God bless and stay safe.